Okay, so you want to own a motel chain. Buy some cheap land next to a highway exit, throw up a simple two-story building, park the cars right outside the rooms, and watch tired drivers pay you $50 or $60 a night just to sleep somewhere clean. That's the picture. Here's the problem. Your entire business depends on a highway exit staying popular for the next 30 years. Your biggest competitor might be the exact same brand name a mile down the road, owned by a completely different person. And the fee you pay just to keep that familiar sign on your roof might be quietly eating more of your profit than you realize. Let's take this apart the way someone who actually runs one of these places has to see it. First, let's talk about why motels exist as a completely different business from hotels, because the difference isn't just about size. A hotel is usually built to be a destination, something people travel toward on purpose. A motel is built to catch people who are already traveling somewhere else. It exists along highways, near truck stops, and at the edges of small towns, selling one simple thing: a clean bed for one night before the driver gets back on the road tomorrow morning. That single difference in purpose shapes almost everything else about how this business is built and run. Because of that, motels are dramatically cheaper to build than hotels, and this is actually the entire foundation of why this business model exists at all. A typical motel, usually a single building or a small cluster of buildings with exterior room entrances instead of interior hallways, can be built for a fraction of what a full-service hotel costs. A modest motel with somewhere between 50 and 80 rooms can often be built for $2 to $6 million, compared to the tens of millions a comparable hotel would require. There's no grand lobby to construct, no elevator systems, no interior corridors needing extra fire suppression, and often no restaurant or banquet space at all. You're essentially building rows of simple rooms with parking right outside the door. Land costs follow the same logic. Motels are almost always built on cheaper land near highway interchanges rather than expensive downtown real estate, which keeps the total investment low compared to a hotel chasing prime city center locations. This is exactly why motels have historically been one of the more accessible ways for an individual investor, rather than a large corporation, to get into the lodging business. The entry price is simply lower. Now, here's where the business model starts to look a lot like the hotel industry, and it's worth understanding this connection clearly. Just like hotels, most motels operating under a recognizable brand name are not actually owned by the big company whose sign is out front. An individual owner, sometimes called a franchisee, buys the right to use a familiar national name in exchange for an upfront franchise fee and an ongoing royalty, usually somewhere around 4 to 8% of room revenue, plus additional marketing fees on top of that. Why would a motel owner give away that much money every single month? Because a recognizable name matters enormously to a tired driver deciding where to stop at 11 at night. An independent motel with an unfamiliar name has to compete purely on price and a bit of luck. A branded motel benefits from a guest's trust built up over years of staying at that same chain in a dozen other cities. That trust translates directly into more cars pulling into the parking lot instead of driving past to the next exit. But here's the twist that catches a lot of new motel owners off guard. Because franchise fees are based on a percentage of revenue rather than a fixed cost, they scale with every single dollar you make, which means during your best months, you're also paying the largest checks back to the parent brand. And unlike a hotel with a strong loyalty program driving direct bookings, many motel guests are simply reacting to a sign on the highway in real time, meaning that recognizable name is doing an enormous amount of the actual selling work, which is exactly why the brand can justify charging so much for it. Now let's talk about how a motel actually makes its money day to day, because the model is refreshingly simple compared to a full-service hotel, and that simplicity is part of the appeal. There's no restaurant to run, no banquet hall to fill, no spa services to manage. Revenue comes almost entirely from one source, the nightly room rate. This makes a motel's finances easier to understand, but it also means there are fewer places to make up for a slow month. When a hotel has a quiet week for room bookings, it can often lean on a wedding booked in the ballroom or a corporate conference filling the meeting space. A motel with no rooms rented that night has almost nothing else generating revenue to soften the blow. This is exactly why occupancy, meaning what percentage of your rooms are filled on any given night, matters so intensely in this business. Because the room rate itself is relatively low, often somewhere between $50 and $100 a night depending on the market, a motel needs a large volume of rooms filled consistently just to cover its costs. And because most of those costs, property taxes, insurance, a small front desk staff, and basic maintenance don't change much whether the motel is half empty or completely full. Every additional room rented is almost pure profit once the building's fixed costs are already covered for the night. Here's an interesting wrinkle specific to this part of the industry. Motel demand is often tied directly to something completely outside the owner's control: traffic patterns. A motel sitting near a highway exit that gets rerouted, or near a local industry that shuts down, whether that's a factory, an oil field, or a construction project bringing in temporary workers, can see its occupancy swing dramatically almost overnight. Some motels near active construction or energy projects can run near full occupancy for years, filled with workers needing a place to sleep during the week, and then see demand collapse the moment that project wraps up. This kind of hyperlocal dependency is far less common in a major hotel chain with resorts and conference centers spread across dozens of different markets. Labor costs, while still significant, are dramatically lower than what a full-service hotel requires. A typical motel can run with a surprisingly small staff, often just a handful of front desk workers covering different shifts, along with housekeeping and basic maintenance. There's no chef, no banquet coordinator, no concierge team. This lean staffing model is actually one of the biggest reasons motels can survive on a lower room rate than a hotel, because the cost of delivering that room to a guest is dramatically lower too. But here's where it gets genuinely difficult, and this is the part of the business that has quietly reshaped the entire motel industry over the past couple of decades. Motels are almost entirely dependent on road travel, and road travel patterns can shift permanently. A new highway bypass built a few miles away can instantly cut off the traffic that used to drive right past your parking lot. Interstate systems built decades ago sometimes routed traffic completely differently than the older highways motels were originally built along, and thousands of once thriving roadside motels across the country slowly emptied out as the roads that fed them simply stopped being the main route anyone used. This creates a genuinely difficult long-term risk for anyone buying into this business. A profitable motel today is only profitable because of a specific set of driving patterns that could change with a single infrastructure decision made by a state transportation department, a decision the motel owner has absolutely no control over. Online booking has added another layer of pressure here too, though in a slightly different way than it affects full-service hotels. Motel guests increasingly compare prices on their phones before ever pulling off the highway, checking review scores and photos in real time from the car. This means a motel with outdated rooms or poor reviews can lose a guest to a competitor literally one exit down the highway, in the same way a struggling hotel loses bookings to a rival across town. The margin for error on cleanliness and basic upkeep is thinner than it used to be, because a bad review is now visible to every single driver deciding where to stop tonight, not just the unlucky guest who experienced it. This pressure has pushed many motel brands to require regular renovation cycles, just like hotel franchises do, replacing bedding, furniture, and bathroom fixtures on a set schedule to keep the brand feeling consistent and trustworthy across every location. An owner who skips these required updates risks losing the franchise agreement entirely, which can be devastating, because that familiar sign was often the single biggest reason cars were choosing to stop there in the first place. So does owning a motel chain actually work as a business? The honest answer depends heavily on location and long-term traffic stability. A single motel sitting at a highway exit with strong, consistent traffic, run with tight cost control, and kept clean and updated, can generate a genuinely solid and dependable return, especially compared to the much larger capital required to build a full hotel. But an owner running several motels across multiple locations gets something a single property owner doesn't: protection against exactly the local risk we just described. If one highway exit loses traffic to a new bypass, or one town's construction boom ends, a motel chain spread across several different markets doesn't collapse with it. This is exactly why the biggest names in this space operate hundreds or even thousands of locations rather than staying small, spreading that highway-dependent risk across an entire country instead of betting everything on one exit. A motel, in the end, is not really a hospitality business in the way a luxury hotel is. It's a real estate bet on a specific stretch of highway, wearing a bed and a shower as its product. The sign out front brings the cars off the road. Everything after that, the nightly rate, the franchise fee, and the traffic pattern nobody can fully predict, is where the real economics of the business quietly live.